Good evening. It's fantastic to have you with us. We've got a really exciting topic tonight. We're talking about with children and young people. We've got a fantastic guest for you. But before we get started, obviously, we want to hear from you too. So let's go to Dave and he can tell us how you can join in. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Nicky. Hi, everyone. Great to have you with us again tonight. So, a couple of ways, as always, to get involved with tonight's conversation. The first one is on Facebook Live. Just head over to the right side of the screen and you should have your comment box. If you want to put any questions or comments in there, then please feel free. The other option you've got is over on X, and all you need to do over on X is to write your X and use the hashtag MHTV. And for anyone that's a little bit older, you'll remember that as Twitter. So without further ado, straight back to you, Nicky.
Absolutely. Life changes, doesn't it, all the time? Let's come to Michaela. Tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself so people know what kind of questions they can ask.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Michaela. I am a mental health nurse. I'm an RMN. However, I always call myself a CAMS nurse because I've only want to work in CAMS. I could work with adults, but I prefer young people. So my job role currently is, it's a bit long, child and adolescent psychiatry liaison clinical nurse specialist. However, I've worked in various other sort of CAMS roles too.
So tell us a little bit about how you decided, definitely, because you're so passionate and so sure this is your area. So how did you first know that? Because I think sometimes when people are students, they're still thinking, how do I know where my place is? How did you know?
I think mine was a little bit backwards. So I always knew I wanted to work with children. I just didn't know in what capacity. And when I was in school myself, in secondary school, I know I wanted to work with naughty children. I knew that, and I don't know why, but didn't want to work with just any child, or children with problems, really. I didn't know that mental health nursing existed or was a thing. So I thought, okay, I need to be a teacher or a child psychologist. Those were the two things, and teacher seemed, well, it was easier to access. So I thought maybe I'll be a teacher. I started working in schools, secondary schools and primary schools as sort of learning support assistants and teaching assistants. But it's awful. I didn't really care about the topics being taught. I only cared about the kids with problems again. And that's what I was drawn to. I wanted to talk to them about themselves, not about geography or whatever it was. So from there, I thought, okay, I'm going to maybe be a psychotherapist. So then I went to Tavistock and I did the M7, which is like the prerequisite, to the psychotherapy training. And for that, I thought I'll get more clinical experience and start working in a unit. Start working in a CAMS eating disorder unit that used to be called Rhodes Farm. That was a while ago now. And from there, I actually really, really loved the job, and I could see what the nurses do in the healthcare assistant. I just loved it. And then I decided to do my nursing a few years later. So it wasn't that
it's completely backwards then to what I was expecting.
I know most people want to be a nurse and then decide, but I wanted to work with children. I didn't know, I just didn't know about mental health nurse. I didn't know even psychiatric units as such for children existed like that. So that was, an eye-opener.
I think that's one of the problems actually that we have with the profession. People just don't know that much about it and what we do. So tell us a little bit about sort of your journey into being a clinical nurse specialist, because that's a very new role for some people to think about.
Yeah, and I guess only in the last year or so even started to find out what that was too. So as I said, I was working at the eating disorder hospital for young people, which I really, really did enjoy. But that was at that point, I was there for about 5 years as a healthcare assistant going into a nurse, and that was my only experience of CAMS. So when I qualified, I wanted to work with a wider range of, I guess, illness. And so I thought to go into a general CAMS unit, tier 4. So I went in as band 5. That was my preceptorship, and it was definitely like a baptism by fire, because it was just, I loved it, but it was also COVID then started a few months later, and the world was different, and you couldn't have predicted what it was going to be like. So that was my first year sort of nursing. Young people weren't allowed out. Anyway, that's another thing. But I did that. Really, really enjoyed it, but I wanted to progress, and there wasn't going to be sort of a way to progress at that unit for a little while. So I then went to become a charge nurse at another
Yeah.
Or adolescent unit. Again, from there, wanted to progress, and the only way to progress is to become ward manager, which I didn't really want to be a ward manager. Yeah, it wasn't for me.
I've been
So
one. Wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, like it's
calling.
Yeah, and I want to be with the kids. Like I want to be with the young people, and I was thinking this is going to be more about managing adults. I think. But yeah, so I was looking at what other band 7 roles even exist. What is it? Is it just ward manager? And then, yeah, I saw the clinical nurse specialist, and I thought that actually fits because I have a very clear specialism and interest. And I know I'm not going to want to work in any other area. That's the area that I want to work in. So, so I applied, I got it, and I've been in that role for the last year and a few months.
It's brilliant, isn't it, to find a place that really feels like it fits your needs, that kind of seniority. So you've got the independence of action, be able to exercise your clinical judgment, but also not necessarily having things like the line management stuff, which can be really quite problematic, managing budgets and that other stuff, which is
exactly that.
And it takes you away from what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and I think with this role as well, I get to be with the young people. I need to see the young people. If there are young people in the ward, I need to see them every day. If they're in A&E, I need to go and see them, which I like. And then at the same time, there's still time away. So it's not like in a tier 4 in a unit where it is 12 hours on the floor. It's different. It's very different. I have time to think
that way.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things we were going to talk about, some of the sort of things that are happening that are new in CAMS. And obviously when we're saying CAMS, we're talking about children and adolescent mental health services. So for anyone who's wondering what the hell we're talking about, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the first things that you brought up that's really impacting the way that you need to work and the things that you need to consider at the moment is social media, which has been a long-term bugbear, I think, generally across mental health, but also specifically, I think, with children and young people. So what's going on with that dynamic at the moment?
So I mentioned COVID, and I think since COVID, things have changed with regards to social media because TikTok began during COVID, and that's where it gained popularity. And TikTok is, I guess, the main way that young people use social media, communicate. It's quick, it's snappy. The algorithm suits, it goes whatever you are interested in. You say it once or you like it once, you'll get everything, which could be great if you just like looking at things about dogs and cats and things, but it's not. If you are struggling with your mental health and you type in anything to do with that, all you'll be fed back is similar content and damaging content often. So that is a big part of even our screening process now. If a young person comes into the emergency department, one of the sections about social media: what apps do you use? Do you access mental health content, and why? Are you accessing it? There's so many reasons a young person might access, or do you even post about your own mental health?
Do you think it's part of almost like risk assessment when people come in?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is definitely, because I think it is a big risk factor. We've had young people who have hundreds and thousands of followers and they only post about mental health content. And we even had discussions about when they're going to be admitted to a unit. Okay, how do I tell my followers that I'm not going to be posting as much? It's a totally, I would never thought I'd have these discussions and thinking through it, because they might think something has happened to her if she doesn't tell them. It's a massive part of risk assessment, because I think everyone has access to you, and you might be posting because you're in a really dark place, but there are people on the internet that most people don't have to take any accountability for what they're saying. So often it will be, well, just kill yourself then. No one wants, you want to die. And that just reinforces the way you feel. So it's actually not as helpful as I think they think it's going to be. It's addictive.
It's a very complicated situation, isn't it? Because obviously it's understandable, isn't it, that any human being wants to be seen on a really fundamental level, to be seen, acknowledged, to be cared about, to be known. All those things are so fundamental to the human experience. But I think at any age, you can get into such a lot of trouble on social media when you're in a situation where you are vulnerable. And to be honest, we can all be vulnerable all the time. It's, I think one of the sort of tricks that professionalism can play on you is to assume that vulnerability is over there, and it's not the case. I mean, last week obviously we were talking about nurse suicide and people being under such huge amounts of pressure and not feeling they can tell people. And how much more must that be when you're still forming as a person, and you're still developing who you're going to be, and you're in hospital.
Yeah.
So there's so much going on there. Is there any way of managing it? Is it that people have come up with yet?
So that is a good question. In the units, in tier 4 units, I mean, it's really difficult because you're talking about sort of people's rights as well. So if we all use our phones as adults, and so why does being unwell mean they can't use their phone if they're going to use it appropriately? And again, it comes down to sort of how old they are. Do they have their parents' consent to use it? Actually, who pays the bill? It's their parents probably, or someone. If they're saying they can have it, there's only so much you can sort of police. I think the way a lot of units have worked out how to manage not being on TikTok all night is to say you're not allowed chargers. The charger's in the office, so it needs to be sort of charged overnight. So that's our main issue, I think, is if kids are using it all night. And they are so consumed and they don't wake up, then they don't access the therapy, they don't go and then it's just a horrible cycle. The other, I think, a lot of the young people do know. They will say, I know it's not good for me, I know I should stop, but it does feel like an addiction. I need the validation that you get that you're not getting in real life, because maybe your life is pretty crap and hard, when they get from strangers. So you're going to keep doing it. We educate, but then I sometimes wonder how much education is for young people. It just sounds like I'm being an old loser, you know.
We all feel that.
And it's like, oh my god, you understand. So it's I probably don't understand because I didn't have it. I didn't have that. I could just experiment with whoever I wanted to be on a small scale within my school of 6 classes or whatever it was. You know, it's not hundreds and thousands of people judging.
There's no permanent record of it.
No. If I was a goth, no one knows. No one knows what I was. But if anything you post is screenshotted, it's shared. And workplaces now, there was a friend of mine was recently applying for jobs in sort of the prison service, and they ask for every social media handle, you know, they go through everything. And I do worry about the young people I work with. They don't realize yet, because they're teenagers, that this is actually going to be there forever.
It's very difficult though to explain like the future implications of a digital footprint to somebody who doesn't see a future.
Totally doesn't matter. Especially if they are planning on dying, you know. It sort of doesn't matter. Short-term validation makes more sense than planning ahead.
And I guess as well there's a sense of connection with that community, particularly if you're poorly, you're in and out of hospital. It's so easy to fall behind with your classmates, you know, and if you have a mental health diagnosis, to have stigma against you at any age is really difficult, let alone walking back into a school with people knowing that you've been away to a hospital. It's really understandable, isn't it, to think of online communities forming?
Of course. And it's just, and some do have really helpful little communities that I've seen. I thought, God, you're really lovely to each other. Like, you're really supporting each other and sharing really positive TikToks or whatever it might be. I think that's not the majority, but it is there. For those, you would sort of encourage and support it. It's interesting. I've been talking with a colleague about it recently, about how sort of connections are made through TikTok and Instagram. And, you know, you see someone posting about their mental health unit, and then the comments underneath, oh, I was there 5 years ago. Oh, and what unit you're at now? I'm at this unit. And then it's amazing, the links that are sort of shared, and within 5 minutes everyone knows everyone. Again, it's a smaller world now. I
can imagine as well that there are some concerns as well from staff about some of the things that are said online.
I've seen those things about me, good and bad. Sometimes they're lovely, and sometimes they're angry at you because I don't know, well, I
said no.
Rightfully so. Can I go out? It's midnight. Well, no, it's midnight. I have rights. I know, but it's also midnight and you're a child, you know, that sort of thing. They're pissed off at you, so they'll post. And I'd have been pissed off as well if someone had told me that. I just wouldn't have had the platform to share it. I'd have gone to my room and been like, let's put on Eminem or something. But it wouldn't have been on the same level. So filming staff happens. That one is that's difficult to police, because if a person's just on their phone you know what they're doing. You're not going to sit next to their shoulder and start looking, it's very difficult. And on the other hand, young people have also been able to show me videos of staff sleeping and things on their observation. So that for me was helpful, because that staff member needed to go home then and not work with young people anymore who are a suicide risk. So it's a bit of both. I wouldn't recommend they do it, but it's a tough one, because they'll tell you something and you aren't going to believe me, and then they've it's a mix. It's definitely a mixed bag.
I suppose it's a tool, isn't it? And it depends who's using it and what they're using it for. Like of anything, it's just that this has so much unmanaged ramifications still for us. And for them.
I was going to say, I think that's my issue. I think more so with TikTok than Instagram. Instagram, the algorithm, it's still there. TikTok is really, it's just, I don't know how to describe it. If it's stronger or just so much more streamlined. Because
it's focused, isn't it? What
you're saying? It is. That's it. And all I get now is, because I was looking up some I thought helpful cams thing. No, all I see is past patients. It's, and I've not typed their names in, so it's mad how I'm linked to them, and I don't know how via social media. So I think that is more so maybe with Instagram, and like I said, young people don't use Facebook anymore, so that isn't really, unless they want to stalk. They said unless they want to stalk you, then they go on Facebook to get the goss. But apart
where the old people are at.
I saw you on Facebook. I'm like, you have
You're
Facebook?
both stalked and offended at that stage.
Yeah.
Like, I get that. So I mean, it feels like there's a lot of work to be done there. Probably some really solid research as well, because presumably there are therapeutic potentials in this as well. Because if you want to talk to someone, you have to go to the place where they are, and if this is where they are, and it's already sort of colonized by people who are maybe not always positive, then maybe there's a case for joining in a different type of way.
Definitely. And one of the things, I mean, I don't have the tech head to do this. I would love if someone could create a sort of a safety planning app, so when when I do safety planning with a young person before they are discharged wherever they're going, we do it on a piece of paper, and that paper gets folded up and put in a pocket, and I don't think it's ever seen again. So I'm always like, take a photo of it, because at least it's on your phone somehow. But it's not the same as having an interactive app where they might be able to, the numbers and the websites I've listed, they could click on them and it'll go straight to that page where there might be a forum with other young people who are struggling, or where it's moderated. There's so much potential. I just don't know how to do it. But we've thought about it within our team a lot, because or they just pass the paper to their parent and I'm like, it's for you, but it's not their medium anymore. So the paper it's nothing. They're always happy, like, would you write it for me? I go, I can, but this is your safety plan. It'd be great if you wrote it. And it is. So I think there is so much scope. There is so much scope. I just think we're not there. I've seen a few safety plans for adults in App Store, but they're not what I would. They're not going to look right. They need to be done, I think, specifically for young people. Yeah, they're not. Yeah.
The first time I saw something that was really well designed was a project from Brighton, which was about helping young people advocate in GP surgeries for themselves. It was so good. It was done by young people who experience mental distress, and it was about asking for being able to complain, being able to sort of get your thoughts in order so that you understand what you want to ask for, understanding your rights around kind of managing your fertility, asking for help. It was such a good piece of work. I mean, really clunky compared to what you see now, but it really does, for people who don't have an advocate, the idea that you could actually draw on that to be able to support your getting your needs met was really, and not having to rely on an adult all the time was really exciting. I thought it was such a good piece of work. You did mention, and we have started to tweet out some resources already. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what is out there that you think actually is pretty good at the minute.
So what I normally recommend, so if a young person is struggling, and that can be in any kind of way. I mean, I'd say the most common ways that I be referring to now are if you're sort of low mood, extremely anxious, maybe thoughts of hurting yourself or actually hurting yourself, planning on harming yourself further than you have already. There's a few really good apps. So the ones that I usually recommend that I like, one is called Calm Harm, and one is called clear fear. And I know, it's catchy names. I forget which one is for which now, but one is more focused, I think, on mood, and one is more focused on anxiety. And there's one for eating issues as well that I forgot to mention, but there's a range of them. Yeah. And there's all sorts of them. So I think there's really good mindfulness activities. There are things to help you fall asleep. There are lots of DBT skills, which people like dialectical behavior therapy, which is really effective for young people who have these feelings. So those skills are on there, which I always like. And it's an app, so it's accessible. They don't have to sit there. It's not obvious what they're looking at. They can look at any time. It's not a book that people are going to be like, oh, why are you reading about self-harm? It's it's more sort of private. And then there's also a website. This is probably more for professionals. It could be for young people as well, or families actually. CAMS, it's called CAMS Resources. I use that all the time. They have so many good printouts, leaflets, just information really about, I don't know, everything: ADHD, autism, anxiety, self-harm, mood, schizophrenia, psychosis, in a really nice way. It's laid out nice, which helps.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I
Does.
mean, young people are so much more visual, because they're working on their phones all the time. It matters what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well on there, which I think is helpful, is there's every sort of diagnosis you could sort of conceive of. They've got some sort of worksheet for it, and they often have it also for young person, for professional, and for family, because it is different. You're speaking to a different like client group, and it's in a way, aren't you? So it has to be worded differently, and I think that's really nice as well. It takes into account neurodiverse people.
Well, thank you for that. I think, Dave, you had a question that you wanted to ask, so we'll come over to you.
Hello, sorry. I just need to unmute. I've been busy tapping away and sharing all the resources that Michaela's been mentioning. I think one of the things I wanted to ask Michaela is, as a health visitor myself, I came at it from an adult nursing background, and you obviously came to the work that you're doing with CAMS from a mental health nurse background. And I suppose just the thoughts of, children's nurses and kind of where you think the differences are in the kind of the education that you had, maybe some of the things you missed out on, or some of the things that you felt were really successful about being a mental health nurse first. So just if you had any thoughts about that kind of sort of prism.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, so before this job, where I'm at a big sort of general hospital, central London, where I'm now one of two CAMS nurses in the whole hospital, but I was the only one for the last sort of year. I'd never really worked with paediatric nurses before. I've just worked with mental health nurses and healthcare assistants who have a special interest in mental health. And so it has been a learning curve for me, and I think for them, because what they sort of say to me is, but we didn't learn about mental health. I didn't think I'd be working really. I thought I was working with little children, or a child who has appendicitis, or a child who has cancer, really difficult things, but in a different way. And at the same time, I think I had a lesson on physical health. So there's so much I couldn't do. When I watched the pediatric nurses running around the ward, I just think, oh my goodness, I couldn't do half the things you're doing. And then they say the same thing to me. So it's different skill set. I think I do teaching in my position as well. And so it's the week after next, actually, I have every so often I do a preceptorship nurses day for the peds nurses, and it's about mental health in children and adolescents. And they always really enjoy it, because I just didn't know this, and I've always been worried. I've been really worried about how to de-escalate someone. What do I do? Because verbal de-escalation is something that isn't taught, and that in mental health, I think you're always taught verbal de-escalation is everything, and anything else restrictive comes way later down the line, especially with children. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. I think another thing that again, from working in mental health, like I said, we have this sort of least restrictive, usually, practice. And so if a young person is hurting themselves, I would not run to hold them. I would try and talk to them, or use, like I said, sensory items, some DBT skills. I'm going to try all of that first before I have to touch them, because these young people are often traumatized. They don't need another adult holding them. If you don't, if you tried everything else. Whereas on a pediatric ward, I was just so shocked because they were held a lot quicker. And I think initially I was critical of that, but when I now sort of reflecting, it's not the same setup. It is a pediatric ward is not a secure unit with there's nothing you can harm yourself with. This is so different, and I can. So it was a learning curve for me because I was like, oh no, we don't restrain a young person. Why we just talk to them? But they don't have the time to sit for an hour and chat to a young person when they have 8 other. So it's that's a big piece of learning for me, really.
It's always strange, isn't it, when you go onto a general ward and you're like, oh my God, this place is a death trap.
I know.
Look at everything here is sharp. Like nothing is fixed down. What is going on?
Yeah. I know. It's so different. I do like it now. Start, I thought, oh God, it's so different, but it's nice. I do like it now, and the nurses are wonderful. They want more mental health training, especially the sort of newly qualified, the student nurses, the ones coming into healthcare. They want to learn and they want to do things differently. So I just sort of soak that up.
Michaela, just to develop that a little bit further, if you don't mind, and it's kind of ticking a different box. Nicky, tell me if you think this is taking us on a bit too much of a tangent. But we kind of been talking to people in mental health nursing that have been really kind of anxious about the amount of time spent on mental health nurse education as part of the 3 years undergraduate study. I suppose, do you feel that there was any time to get more information in there about children and children's mental health, or is that something that it would have never fitted and you always need to save that for after, in your preceptorship and, time on the job kind of thing?
No, I think you're right. I think it needs to be during university, because if you start with that anyway, you're starting with why are people the way they are? And we're not in a vacuum. Let's look at their childhood. Let's look back. And if you're teaching about childhood mental health, you're going to understand the adults a lot better when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. And that's one of the things that I teach. And when I go through statistics of adults who are sort of incarcerated, who are addicted to heroin, who have attempted suicide, then you look at how many ACEs they've had. It's quite clear. And how to de-escalate a child is different to how to de-escalate an adult, and how to work with a child, how to talk to a child. They see through you. They can sense like if you're not genuine, or if you are having them on, if you're not actually that interested. I mean, adults can too, but children, young people have like different. They're so sensitive.
They'll tell you.
They'll tell you. Yeah.
Being inauthentic, you get it in both barrels very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that sort of needs to be taught because it is different. And when I've seen adult mental health nurses, not always, but some adult mental health nurses say working for the first time with children, it's an adult response, and it's not the response that a child might need. And I think I've had this debate with some adult mental health nurses actually, and they'll say, oh, you do too much hand holding in CAMS, and it's sort of all kumbaya. Well, they're children, and so I probably would have a softer approach, because a young person isn't probably going to come into mental health services if their life is just absolutely wonderful and there's nothing going on somewhere. Not saying it's all on the family or all on the school or all on anything. There's something that isn't quite right, and I don't know, kindness, it doesn't cost anything, and it often has much better outcomes than if you're quite maybe harsh or straightforward the way you could be with an adult who knows their mind, who's had life experience.
I do worry about people like they just need tough talking. It's like the whole point of nursing is compassion. If you don't have it, go home.
Oh yeah, and we'll say that too.
I think one of the weird things about the CAMS comment as well is that I assume this is still the case. I don't do as much work with the children and adolescent as I used to, but I know that the last Children's Commissioner in England, Anne Longfield, did a rapid review of CAMS, and what she found out was that there's such a poor amount of services out there for the demand that children had to be in such a high level of crisis to be able to access CAMS. So that kind of thing about, oh, it's a bit hand-holding, it's like, yeah, but you're hand-holding the people that are absolutely desperate for those services because they've had to get to that stage to be able to access them. So a bit of a weird one on that front.
But you're right. There are children who've said it's so awful. They've been on a waiting list for CAMHS and they've taken an overdose, and they've then said, "But I'm an A&E, and now I'm going to get what I need." But they had to. They didn't have to, but they felt that they had to do something extreme because they keep being told you don't meet the threshold. You don't meet the threshold for our service.
Yeah.
When actually these are the kids that you need to work with. They're not, okay, maybe they're not at the point where they're going to take an overdose. Great. That's, hope they never do. But yeah, so that is definitely the case. We have
children respond to learning cues, and if what you're teaching them is you need to be in danger for us to care about you, then they'll put themselves in danger, and that's really frightening.
Yeah, and they do. And when people say, things like, "Oh, it's only so superficial self-harm, you're okay." Okay, the next time, just you can count on they're going to cut down to the bone. And why would you say it anyway? And I think that's something about the staff, isn't it? It's your own issues there with
definitely
what's going on.
Definitely
doesn't help the child. I don't know why.
And to describe somebody who's so desperate they've cut their own skin as superficial, it's a superficial issue. I find it absolutely, it incenses me. Me. I'm kind of pleased that I can still feel things at this stage of my career, so I'm not really bothered about that.
Yeah. True.
So tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously Dave touched on that, about the acuity then, because obviously that's changed with, particularly even with COVID.
It has. What a lot of, I think, it's the kids who were, I think, sort of say in year 6 going into year 7, that kind of age group have really struggled because they didn't get a year 7 or they didn't get secondary school experience. They made their friends online. That was one aspect of it that they've sort of said, well, I hate school because I don't know school, I don't know secondary school, it's different. They did it all online, or if they didn't do it at all. And it wasn't monitored as heavily as going into school. And I think the next part of that, which you probably see more so, is that children were not allowed to leave the house. And if they live in difficult conditions or situations, they have no escape. School might have been an escape, therapy might have been an escape, going to see their cat, nothing, you could not escape. And so we saw eating disorders just skyrocket with young people during COVID, but also so did self-harm. And I think we can't really say enough about what being locked inside your house for years, essentially, has done for young people's development. And that's when we say about, young people's mental health, it's their development, it's developing into adolescence and developing into adulthood, and it has stilted it. They don't feel as resilient, they don't feel able to handle change. Actually, I was going to say bad changes, but actually just change, I think, is far more difficult because they weren't given the time, like in year 7, where you make friends, you fall out with them, you experiment, they were just in their house with their phone.
It was such a disorientating time for everybody, I think. And the people who you mostly think of actually had resources, they had cash, they had some choices. But I think for young people that was experienced completely differently. And also experiencing that time as an adult, you knew that there was a time before and a time to come afterwards. And I think with young people, their perspective is foreshortened, doesn't it? It's not, everything is more intense because it's hitting for the first time.
Well, this is life now. This is it. Who knows if things are going to change? And as I said, before, that was my first experience of being a nurse. I started in September, and then I think lockdown was March. And I just remember there was no incentive for the young people to get better. I remember them saying to me, well, why would I listen to what you're saying? I'm not going to get any leave. And I was like, no, and it's awful because that would be, it's behavioral activation, isn't it? We're going to do this, we're going to do that. There's incentives. There was no incentive. Can you see your family? You can see one of them for 10 minutes once a week in a room down the hall, all in PPE. What is that? That's not appealing. It's just, there was no home leave. There was no, it really, really, really was difficult. And the young people, I think, deteriorated during COVID, whether they're inpatient or whether they're at home.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And as well, there was another thing which we wanted to talk about. So obviously, the shape of services is changing. So obviously, service provision is continuing to 25 now in some places.
In
some
places,
a little bit about that.
It needs to be everywhere. So hopefully, it's been sort of you know, hush hush talks for a long time, people thinking CAMS should be extended past 18. And I went to a conference a couple of months ago. I think it was with CUNIC, and that was one of the topics about transitions. And we had a sort of debate / discussion at the end. It was so interesting about whether CAMS should be extended up to 25, because a lot of services are trialing it. And they had one service from up north, and they were talking about how they had trialed it and, you know, how it had been successful. Now, I agree that CAMS services should be extended up to about 25 is what we're saying, because I just don't think, and I think at 18, you don't wake up on your 18th birthday as an adult. That might be the legal age, but, you know, developmentally, I can't see how it's that much different to 17 or even 16. At 21, I don't think I was making the best life choice that I would make now at 34, you know, and it's just such a harsh cutoff as well. You'll be in, I've had children, you know, it's awful, on the night before their 18th birthday, you know, crying on my lap, saying, I'm going to an adult unit tomorrow. What are they going to be like? Why? I don't want to, I'm scared. And it's going to, and it's so hard, I can't lie, it's going to be very different. It's not going to be, it's not going to be this CAMS unit. There's not going to be, and it's heartbreaking, because I know they're not, it's the stage, not age. They're not developmentally there to be a unit with adults. So there are some
things that have been delayed by being ill.
Of course, and they've missed school, they've missed having friendships, they've missed all of that. So there are some services. There's a service within my hospital, so psych oncology, that goes up to 25, and so I've been lucky enough, you know, to work with young people who are sort of 22, 24, and it's so similar to how I'd work with older teenagers, and the benefit of a sort of, I guess, a CAMS, a young people approach, and young practitioners who work with young people, from what they've said themselves, has been so helpful. They want someone they can maybe relate to, that they think understands them, that it's a different approach, and they really value it. There were some people at that conference who were quite anti it. It was a minority, but they were quite.
What's the argument against it? Obviously, apart from the fact there's no beds for the people who are actually in them, let alone anything else.
They were saying no, 18. It was quite interesting. It was quite fixed. Adults is 18, and then maybe there could be a transition team from between 18 to 25, and then adults. They just didn't think that it should be CAMS until 25. And I can see it, and I don't agree with it. I can see it, but I don't agree with it, because I still think it should be extended. I think the cutoff is too harsh. Some services now are trying, you know, if you're not going to be kicked out when you're 18, they might hold on to you for another year or so until you're
settled, at least in a different lifestyle.
At least, yeah, exactly. Not going from a unit to a unit to a unit to a unit. Like, I don't know how that's helpful. Kids need a bit more time, maybe. But yeah, I hope it will extend in all services, but I think that's the move, but it hasn't happened yet.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the idea that you could have a space with like a 25-year-old and an 11-year-old on together.
Oh, I know.
That is, takes some thinking through, doesn't it?
It does. And even now, when you have a 17-year-old and an 11, you know, and if they become friends, and even there you're like,
you friends.
Are you friends? Yeah, what's happening? So that is even safeguarding-y stuff on units as they are. So never mind if it was a 25-year-old, and you would have to think about separating it. But I worked at a unit that is a CAMS unit, but they had 3 different wards. One was for the children, one was for the older children, and one was HDU, and that worked quite nicely. So you had the sort of 15 to 18, and then the sort of 11 to 15, and then it was the 15 was sort of dependent, or was it 14, dependent on your own maturity. Really, because there were some older 15-year-olds and some younger. So that would so it can work, and I guess it's just about resource and whether people are backing it and think it would work.
I mean, for my part anyway, I would say the idea of getting someone settled into adulthood without feeling like they're being thrown out, and then they'll just immediately rebound if they've not developed the skills and the support networks to survive. What do you think is going to happen? Just 10 times worse?
Yeah,
It makes a lot more sense, doesn't it, to settle somebody with a team that they know and a way of working they're already familiar with.
Yep, and especially the young people we see with sort of complex trauma, or who are so used to the feeling of rejection, and then it's just another, I've formed an attachment, this person's helpful to me, bye, you're an adult now.
Yeah, and becoming an adult shouldn't be a punishment, should it? And exactly what you were describing.
Yeah.
It kind of takes us into one last sort of topic before we sort of finish up, was that idea about self-diagnosis and how people are negotiating identity at the minute. So let's just launch into yet another really big topic.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Michaela?
Self-diagnosis is such an interesting, I find it so interesting, and TikTok also has a place to play there. So if I just compare, this is again going to sound like an old person, but if I compare myself as a teenager in like early 90s, late 90s, whatever it was, to now, I think I'd have been absolutely mortified if, and so would all my friends, if anyone knew there was anything that wasn't perfectly normal about me, or if there was any sort of flaw, if anyone knew anything that was going on in my life or family or mental, no. I remember one girl having to go and see, I went to a Catholic school, so the nun was like the counselor, but anyway, had to go and, I know.
Great practice.
Exactly. But had to go and see her, and everyone was like, oh my God. Whereas I think now we're at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think we need the middle of the spectrum. So the other end of the spectrum right now is a young person who's struggling. Their sort of profile would be, I don't know, say Michaela, BPD, ADHD, ASD, bipolar, complex trauma. And I just think, so that is your identity. That's the first thing you want people to know about you. And actually, you're 14, so do you have a personality disorder? Because I don't think you do. And they've probably read line, okay, or typed in how I feel. I feel lost, rejected.
Yeah.
You're a teenager. And actually, same. We did. And there's a lot of young people, I think it's mostly sort of borderline personality, EUPD, that young people are self-diagnosing with. And I think is so unhelpful. You're a child. So it's, you can't even have that diagnosis because your personality hasn't actually formed. So, but giving yourself that diagnosis
without knowing what it means for
that way,
to see it as well.
And you're
everywhere.
That's my sort of worry with it. And I don't think it's bad. There's some really great young people that I've sort of followed who are advocates. And so there's like one young person I follow with ADHD and autism. They post wonderful material, and it's so interesting everything they do. But they're coming from a not recovered, but they have used to
peace. They understand.
Yes.
Informed.
Yeah, which is very different in the midst of crisis about what you think might be wrong with you. But then I've said this to a young person, and we were just talking about it, and they sort of said, so when am I going to get my diagnosis then? Because the wait list for a assessment is 2 years. They're right. True. But then we went into discussion, do you need a diagnosis? Would it be helpful? Is it unhelpful? What is it about a diagnosis that's going to make you feel contained? For some people it does. And maybe, again, when you're a teenager and you want something to identify with, it probably would feel containing. I don't feel containing 10 years later when you have the label, which it does become a label of, unfortunately, of a personality disorder.
And a self-fulfilling prophecy as well.
Yes.
Because people will respond to you as you signal to them. And the signal you put out as a kid is not necessarily something you want to be paying for when you're 25.
Well, exactly. I think
it's not right. It's not okay, but it's also probably fact.
It is fact at the moment. I would love that to change, because actually I think my sort of main interest is probably complex trauma personality disorder, and that's and just trauma in general. I'm really, I was gonna say I love it. I don't love it. I'm interested in it. So it's interesting then to me again how if an adult turns up at A&E having self-harmed, when I read the notes out of interest, sometimes I just EUPD ? And it's quite dismissive. In the way that I don't think if a young person came in and showed me their cuts, I can't imagine. It's just different, and maybe it's because they don't have that label yet. I mean, it shouldn't be a label anyway; it's a diagnosis, but we know it is, and people amongst a lot of healthcare professionals. And until that changes, I just would hope young people would seek support for what they're going through rather than have to give it a name.
It's 4 or 5 different. The reason it's complicated is there's 4 or 5 different things happening at once, isn't it? So it's a young person's search for identity, meaning, belonging, Those things are fantastic. Of course, you should want those things. And if you don't feel like you have the option to choose something that's maybe more mainstream, it's understandable to go for something that actually gives you the quirkiness, the bleakness, the something that makes people maybe take care of you a little bit.
Yes.
That makes sense. And then also looking at the system, how broken it is and how overstretched it is. It's also really smart and strategic to think, I'll get my diagnosis in now. By the time I'm ready to pursue that therapy, it'll just be arriving. And that makes sense too. But it also feels really sad to me that you would have to define yourself by the things that have happened to you. Because as a young person, trauma is something you're not broken. The people around you or the situations around you are not right. That's the problem. It's a diagnosis that hits the individual, but really what the problem is the lack of safety surrounding them. And I find it really sad when people take that pain from outside and then make that who they are, because that's not who they are.
No, it's not who they are. And that's one thing I always sort of say to young people, usually when they're leaving, or if they're or even if they're in the midst of crisis, is that, I can't promise you a lot, but I can promise you can have a bad childhood and a good adulthood. It's an absolute possibility. It's not even a possibility. It will happen if everyone around you puts in the work and you put in the work, which is hard. Because again, like you're saying, you didn't do this to yourself necessarily. Things have happened that have got you to respond in this way. But I think in terms of hope, I think young people need you to hold on to the hope. They don't have the hope. They have hope. They might have not adults that actually have had hope for them or have responded in sort of appropriate ways. They need you to hold it for them, which can be like heavy, but it's the right thing to do and it's sort of a worthwhile thing to do.
I mean, it's a really interesting time to be coming into Cam's work from what you're saying. Everything is in flux, everything is changing, and how you and the next generation of Cam's nurses secure that future is going to really make a huge difference to everybody working in mental health, because your clients right now are tomorrow's everybody else's.
Cam's is the best, and it gets bad rap. Cam's is the best because young people are fun, they're funny, they're things that they come out, they are fun you have. It's never boring. And I think not that it was boring, but when I did my adult placement, I was like, no one wants to interact with me. I'd go around and be like, shall we do some artwork? And they're like, no, can I go and leave? I'm like, but with there's so many ways you can engage a young person if you want to. A lot of people don't. But there are so many ways. Let's do karaoke. Shall we sing something? Shall we just go and sit in the sensory room? There are so many. These young people want and need someone to be able to attach to in a healthy way. And you could be that person for them that can change their trajectory. And
absolutely, it's life-changing work.
It's life-changing. And I speak to a few, they're adults now, which is mad to me, that have reached out in adulthood, doing so well in their lives, and who are in inpatient units who are very challenging and really unwell. And great one's becoming a mental health nurse, one, and I do co-production with them. Yeah, exactly. And you sort of, you realize, you see how what you think is a small actually changed their life. So
yeah, absolutely. I can see we've come a bit over time, everyone. Sorry, but we did tackle some topics tonight. So let's just whiz around and see if there's anything that anybody else wants to add. Dave, is there anything you wanted to add? You have no chance.
Two quick things. The first one is Michaela mentioned earlier adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And next week, we've got Sarah Lewis, who is going to talk about trauma and attachment. And then the week after, we've got Steve Trenchard, who's going to talk about trauma and compassion as a framework for mental health nursing. So without knowing it, Nicky, your amazing skills at booking guests has come to the fore again. I think the other thing that I wanted to say was, I know, Nicky, you're always really keen that we try and end on some really positive messages. One of the positive things for me tonight has really been how Michaela's spoken so passionately about mental health nursing and about children. And I think it's that bit, isn't it, that often we can focus on the negative parts of work. We can get sort of browbeaten and downhearted by it all. But actually, just listening to Michaela speak for the last 50 minutes, it's really kind of I'm sure there'll be people out there that feel really buoyed by it and really positive by it. So, you absolutely fulfilled a great brief there, Michaela. So well done.
Thanks. Good. I hope so. Join hands.
Anything you wanted to say before we finish, Michaela? It's not the law, but if you want to, please do.
I think we're good. I think, yeah, I just ended on that bit of hope.
Yes, absolutely. In that case, everybody, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We've really enjoyed your company. We'll be retweeting resources and things like that. So do follow up on any areas of interest that you've got. And thank you all for your time. Take care and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Night night.